Hi there, and thanks for tuning in to our second quarter Wellness Wednesday podcast session. So today's topic will be student mental health and mental health resources, and we're so excited and proud to have three of our own PGCPS students join us on the podcast today. We also have a professional school counselor from Northwestern High School, but before we get started, I wanted to just mention a couple things. There is a link in the YouTube caption for a brief survey. We do want to hear from you if you have any feedback related to the podcast, if there's anything that you would like us to address in future sessions, or if you have any questions related to mental health, please click on that link below and make sure you just tell us how you liked it. Now that that's out of the way, we can dive right in with introductions. I'm Ms. Emily Pasco. I'm one of the mental health coordinators here in PGCPS. And joining me today, we have an Eleanor Roosevelt High School student, Ms. Naya Elliott Grant, 11th grade student, correct?
12.
12?
Yeah,
oh,
that's
yes,
right.
that's right. That's right. Senior.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us. And we also have Ms. Hernandez, a professional school counselor from Northwestern High School. So thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to you both today.
Yes.
Having us. And first of all, I wanted to start with a couple of statistics just to highlight where we are related to mental health in PGCPS specifically. So I did pull some data points from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and this was from 2021-2022 school year, which is the last year that we have available data from. So according to that survey, 45% of PGCPS high school students reported being so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more than in a row that they stopped doing some usual activities. And that was a 15% increase from 2013. And then we also have a statistic that 21% of our PGCPS high school students seriously considered attempting suicide at least once in the previous year. And that's a 5% increase from 2013. So also nationwide data indicates that an average of 11 years follow a child's first symptoms of a mental health disorder before they get some kind of treatment. And some of the most common reasons for delaying mental health treatment include, I'm sure, things that you all have kind of observed amongst your peers or your students, the stigma around mental health, lack of available resources, and financial barriers, and also misconceptions about mental health in general. So one of the goals here today is to decrease the stigma by having a conversation about mental health and mental health resources in PGCPS and also in the larger community. So thank you both for being part of this important podcast and this important information that you're both going to share with us today.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah. So Naya, I wanted to start with you, my senior student.
Yes.
Again, thank you. I was wondering if you tell us a little bit about yourself and how your mental health has been throughout the years and kind of what's going well and what you might be struggling with depending on the day.
Yeah, I mean, being a student in general, it's very stressful. Now, I'm a senior. We just did, the applications for college. Oh my gosh, that was stressful. I tell you that. And I know there's so many people out there that don't have the support that I have, so I'm so thankful for that. Just, being surrounded by people that actually care about, making sure that I'm where I need to be.
Right.
Exactly. So, honestly, it's just been a stressful time being a student in general. Yeah. But being surrounded, it's just so good when you have people that actually care.
Yeah.
And they're actually there telling you they're there for you, It's just like, I remember I was talking to you the other day and oh my gosh, it's so important that you take time for yourself. I kept saying that over and over and over again, because if you don't take time for yourself, you're not going to be able to be in the right place mentally.
Right.
And I keep telling myself that. My parents keep telling me that. They're like, take time for yourself. But they're also saying that it's very important to stay in a good place academically.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that balance can definitely be hard. Because
exactly.
on the one hand, if you're not doing well mental health-wise, that's definitely going to impact your academics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what my dad always tells me. If your head is not in the right place, your grades are not going to be good.
So
it's just
that's so important, and I'm glad to hear that you have parents that support you in that effort as well.
Exactly.
I was wondering if you could share with students and parents and whoever else might be listening, what are some of the things that you do to take time for yourself?
Yes. Okay. So on a regular day, I will, ride the bus home, and then after that, I take an hour for myself. Every single day, I take 1 hour to do whatever I want. If I want to go to sleep, I do that. If I want to scroll my phone, I'll do that, you know? If I want to go eat, you know, rest, I do that. But then afterwards, that's when I'll start my work. And oh my gosh, it's so important to take breaks.
Yeah.
You can't be doing your work all night.
Right.
It's not going to work. You're not going to be productive. So that's one thing I always do. I always take breaks, but I also like keep my focus.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. You have to reset.
Right, exactly.
Every now
Resetting
and then.
every single day because you're in school for so many hours. It's so much
Yeah.
just being in school for so long and then going home and doing more work.
Yeah.
It's so stressful to me. So it's important that you take that time for yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's also important how you touched on you take an hour every day. So
Yes.
you're very intentional about that hour
Exactly.
and that time and how you spend that. So I think that's a great tip for any students listening and even any adults. You know,
Right,
it's hard.
yeah.
It's a lot, you know, school is stressful
Oh,
and if we have
man,
adults that
right.
I'm sure there's parents that also have full-time jobs and just
Exactly.
the responsibilities and the different priorities and things like that. And sometimes just need to take a step back and
Right,
have that
yes.
reset.
Every day.
Yeah, so that's awesome. And thank you for sharing some of, that.
Of course.
And how's the college application process? Can you tell me a little bit about like what
Yes,
particular, or is it just the whole thing that's stressful? The paperwork, the anxiety about it.
So, yes, I think paperwork, a big thing.
Yeah.
But then, I'm going to tell students this now. Applications, they are going to need that letter of recommendation. If you have that recommendation already lined up, you're going to be fine. But if you're stressed about it, it's the most stressful thing, in my opinion. But, you know, the paperwork, you know, my counselor, she did her thing. Thank you for her. Oh, my gosh. It was like, that was one part I didn't have to worry about because she just handled it. So that was good. But, man, if you don't have your grades lined up, and I know it's more stressful for people that don't have, you know, the straight A's or the
Right.
4.0, but if you have that figured out, it's so simple, you know? And it's just like, I felt so calm doing the process at certain points.
Right.
Because my parents were like, you're going to be fine. You're going to get into certain colleges. And I think my parents constantly telling me that, it just calmed me down.
Yeah, that reassurance.
Yes,
that
reassurance.
something's going to work out. It
Yes,
might not be your
something.
first choice or
Right.
your ideal plan, but
Exactly.
it'll all work out.
Right. That's so important to me. Yeah.
Definitely. And shout out to your school counselor as well.
Yes. Oh, she did her thing. She did so good. Yes.
Thank you so
of
much
course.
for sharing all that. And
Yeah.
I guess that's a good segue to our school counselor that we have here today. So I feel like it's pretty common knowledge that all of our PGCPS schools have a school counselor, at least one. All of our high schools have many school counselors. And that you all have various roles. So you all do a lot of different things in the school building. I was wondering if you could give us a brief overview of your big key roles in school communities.
Yeah, so we are essentially advocates for students. We help them, you know, how to navigate the academic world, their personal world, and also that college and career world that Naya was talking about. So, and all that to say that the personal world is the most important because they take all that to school, all that to, you know, whatever processes they're working on, and whether they're, you know, applying for college like Naya was talking about, and whether they're good mentally, emotionally, that's what really determines how well they navigate all these aspects of their worlds, right? So, you know, one of the most important things we do as school counselors is do outside referrals, whether it's to additional resources in the community or even mental health services, which one of them that we work with is Hazel Health.
Okay, yeah, that's right. And I know you all, as school counselors, you do a lot to support student mental health in schools.
Yes.
But then when it gets to a point where, like, you know, maybe this student might need a little bit of additional resources, is that when you kind of make the referral to outside agencies?
Yeah, so depending where the student is at, right? But a lot of the things I find myself doing is definitely that outside referral to counseling services. I work in a school where the majority of the population is Latino students. So one of the things that is hard to do is connect students to services that are bilingual, right? And Hazel Health does that for us. And I think that's one of the greatest resources we have right now, because it not only do they offer free like services for the for the students, because a lot of them, well, especially my school, doesn't have health insurance.
Right.
And that's one of the things that really facilitates that process for parents and students. And I find it so useful because it's, at home or at school. So but I guess your question was, how do we determine, well, it really depends on where the student, whether it's a short-term thing that a school counselor could work with them, or
Right.
whether it requires more than one meeting or more than 1 hour meeting, then that's when you
Yeah.
need to seek those outside
Yeah, that makes
services.
sense. And thanks for telling us about that. I know, just to back up a little bit, PGCPS recently partnered with Hazel Health, and they provide an additional service related to both physical health and mental health. So we have our school nurses using Hazel Health, where families or students can access a doctor or a nurse practitioner to receive those physical health services and prescriptions and things, even if they don't have insurance. And the same is true for teletherapy as well.
Yeah.
So it started in last December. We started with the high schools receiving it at home and then at school. So all schools now this year will have access to Hazel at school and Hazel at home. And what that is students can talk to a mental health professional. All of the people on the Hazel telehealth for mental health side are licensed in Maryland. They're all licensed social workers or professional counselors. So they all have that Maryland credential, and they're able to meet with students on that consistent weekly basis to address some of the things that maybe school counselors, whether it's that they need that more clinical support or that more consistent support. And I love how you touched also on they do have clinicians with multiple language proficiencies, so it's a great resource for our students who speak a language other than English for their native language. So thank you so much for sharing some of that. I was wondering if you would tell me, logistically, how your school has utilized Hazel. What does it look like when a student needs to maybe come out or where do they do teletherapy, I guess, and what's that look like?
Okay, so initially the referrals happen with the counselor. We do the referrals, and I guess if you look at it, it's divided as caseload. So each counselor would refer to their students to Hazel Health. Then we have the iPad for Hazel Health in our wellness center, and we have a room just dedicated to Hazel Health. Counselors are also the initiators right now. It works at the moment, and usually the student comes to our offices and lets them know, hey, we have an appointment. We take him to the wellness center, we initiate the appointment, we stay there for a couple of minutes just to see, the student's okay and all that, if there's any issues. But other than that, that's what we do. We start the appointment after, we refer them.
Yeah. So when you say initiate the appointment, you mean setting up the technology, making sure everybody's connected
Yes.
For a couple minutes, and then you leave, and that's a confidential session between a student and a clinician.
Yes.
On the iPad.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Same thing is available at home as well. So I don't know if you've seen or heard any students accessing that at home, or if it looks kind of the same.
So yes, we have a couple of students who do it at home, especially for our evening school students who have, virtual school. They have their appointments at home. I don't know how it works at home, right? But I know that it's also successful that way. They can, have their meetings anywhere in the home, just as long as they have an electronic device.
Right, that access. And if they're below 18, they would need to have an adult present in the home, similar to how you all set it
Yes.
up, to make sure that they're safe. That's great, and I'm very grateful that your counseling team is using it, and that your students are hopefully seeing some benefits. Have you heard anything from students about how their thoughts about seeing someone virtually have been?
Yeah, so some students may be a little resistant to seeing a virtual therapist because they'll say, well, the person's not personally here,
Right.
it just feels weird, a little awkward. But a lot of times when they, give it a try, they do tend to like it. I'm thinking about a student in particular who just 2 weeks ago, they were saying, no, I'm not really into that. I'd rather see someone in person. But, I got to persuading her, and they were good. they really
Came
like
around
it now.
to it.
Yeah, so they're probably on their third week right now.
Oh, good.
And they're doing well on Hazel.
Yeah, you imagine
Yeah.
if you're used to seeing someone face to face,
Yeah.
and then you're like, now I have to see someone on a screen. It's a little bit of an adjustment, but still receiving, a level of care that can be critical for so many of our students.
Yeah,
So
and I think it's a good introduction to therapy if you're
Yeah.
not so familiar with it too.
yeah, that's a great point. Kind of like dipping your toes in a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing that information about Hazel. We have also linked in the caption a link to Hazel Health's page for students who are interested in maybe learning more or talking to parents about it. If parents want to access that link, it does require, a consent from a parent to start an appointment, whether it's at school or at home. So those are just some of the logistical things, but we tried to make it easy and just put a link in the caption here. So hopefully some people have heard what you've shared and said, maybe it is for me. Maybe I can benefit from this, or some parents as well. So thank you. Okay, now I would like to shift a little bit. So we did have students submit some questions related to mental health. So this will be kind of our last segment of the podcast here, just some student submissions, and we can answer them as best we can, I guess. So one of the questions from a student is, how do you know when to work through a mental health issue versus when to take a break? So I don't know if Ms. Hernandez, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, so I think it's difficult to say, even for me as a professional, right, myself, like when I need a mental break or if it's related to a mental issue. Because I think symptoms related to mental health can, show themselves in different ways. And really trying to determine whether, hey, am I feeling this anxious or this, just jittery or on edge because I'm just anxious right now, or am I, suffering from some type of any mental health issue. But I think once you can tell yourself, yeah, I'm gonna take a break, but then if that doesn't make you feel better, or if you feel like you're consistently taking a lot of mental breaks, then that's a way to determine whether, yes, maybe I do need to see a professional school counselors, speak to my parents or a doctor. So I think just noting how often you feel like you need to have these mental health breaks, I think that's important to determine whether it's a bigger issue.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would even kind of expand to say, there's things that everybody can do, like coping skills, and taking a break is certainly one of them. Others include, listening to music, socializing with friends. So knowing the coping skills that typically might work, and then observing, if taking a break or any of those other coping skills aren't working or stop working, then it might be worth exploring other ways to work through that mental health issue, whether that's through a psychologist or a trusted adult or medication or what have you. Our senior student, any insight you have? I know you already talked about taking breaks a lot, but anything else come to mind?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. Really what you said. It's like after you see the same thing happening over and over and over again, that's a point where it's just like, maybe I do need some extra support. Maybe it's not just, oh, I'm feeling this way in the moment,
Yeah.
That's what happens for me. Like, things will happen, but then after, a certain amount of time, it will go away. So if that happens, then I would see, everything as being fine. But if it kept happening over and over and over again, if I was just so stressed and it's like it's causing problems every day, then that's where I'd be worried. I'll be like, maybe I do need a little bit extra support from someone that, is my parents or, the school.
Yeah, another great point, that level of impact. If it's affecting your functioning, whether it's academically or socially with friends or other things. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah. And kind of also a segue to our next question. Another student, our second submission today is, how can I get a therapist even though I know my parents won't agree to it?
Familiar with some of these, similar situations. I think that's a difficult and it's a hard, unfortunately, situation for students because sometimes, the parents aren't as supportive or they may have some feelings towards what mental health and therapy is. One of the things I always tell my students is to, constantly include parents in that conversation of just wanting to receive counseling. And that way, they're familiar with that conversation.
Right.
Then also speaking to school counselors so they can get involved into that conversation with their parents. So, having someone outside of that dynamic, explain what mental health looks like and what counseling is and what that could look like if there's resources available in the school. I feel like a parent would be more agreeable to counseling if the services came from the school and explain how yes, your student is feeling this way, but this is how it can help if academically if they join this therapy, counseling, all that.
Yeah, those are great points, and even school can be a starting point, and then reevaluating if additional community resources might need to be in place. And you made a great point about school counselors are really student advocates, and you all have seen firsthand the benefit of things like therapy and things like that. I mean, that type of mental health support. So I think that's great, a great reminder to students to tap into those people at the school who can help have those hard conversations with parents, because they can be hard conversations for whatever reason, whether it's generational differences, mental health. How we've talked about it over the past several years, even the past few years, has, I think, changed significantly. So it's kind of, I think it might be one of those things where it just has to be an ongoing conversation with parents and guardians, and most of the laws require that students under 18 have that consent to receive actual therapeutic services. But Naya, as you're listening, do you have any thoughts or what works well when you speak to your parents? Because I know you've talked about having those conversations.
Yeah. My parents are very supportive. So if I came to them and I said that, I want to seek some professional help, they would be open to it. And I think that's really important for parents. If they're supportive, then half of the problems that, students are having can be solved.
Yeah.
Because I know I have some friends, the parents are not open to it at all. Like mental health services, they're not open to it. And it's just like, that's hard.
Yeah.
If your parents aren't willing to support you through this, then what other solution is there, Because like you were saying, you have to be over a certain age to seek those services yourself. So without that type of support, it's just really hard.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful for my parents and them being open to, getting help if I needed it.
Yeah, and any parents we have listening that are, maybe thinking about ways they've reacted to a child coming to them with mental health concerns, I would just say, everybody grows. There's potential for everybody to grow. We're all learning about mental health and how to respond to things, and just to maybe let go of that guilt that might be happening, because I don't want this conversation to, end in any guilt on the part of the parent, but just to be a talking point to open up the conversation a little bit more. So hopefully it does that. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, and shout out to your parents.
Yes.
That's great. And okay, our last question is from a different student. Do you have any tips, and this is very timely, to deal with seasonal depression? So seasonal depression, I'm guessing the student is referring to seasonal affective disorder, which is a depressive disorder in the DSM-5. It's an actual diagnosis with symptoms of not having low energy, losing interest in things that were previously engaging to them, and generally that depressed mood that comes during the late fall and winter months. So, Ms. Hernandez, anything come to mind with this question?
Yeah, so like for depression in general, I think if we want to answer with tips, I would say, exercise, healthy diet, talking to people. But I think it's also important to say that it's important to know what seasonal affective disorder is, and if it's really diagnosed, then yes, follow, some of those tips. But I think it's easy to confuse any other type of depression with seasonal. So how do you determine is it just seasonal or if it's really something I've been feeling and now that, we're in the season, it feels worse. So I think if you're in that boat, then maybe you need to have a conversation again with, an adult and just make sure that you are in the right place and not just, hoping to get, just tips here and
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely requires that diagnosis to actually know what's going on before they take any tips from like TikTok or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Like being sure to actually talk to a parent or a guardian who can maybe facilitate exploring those symptoms that might be indicative of depression or seasonal affective disorder. That's great. And one thing I'll just say in general about seasonal affective disorder is I would say, I think it's so important to make a plan before, like if you know your patterns, and I think this can apply to anything, like if people know that they get more stressed out around maybe a certain time of year, for example, if a loved one passed in April and that's going to be a hard time for you, or if winter will be a hard time for you, just kind of thinking ahead and being aware of that and making a plan. And even writing it on paper and somewhere where that you can see it, that these are my coping skills, these are things that I'm going to do to get ahead maybe of what might be coming.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when people talk about seasonal depression, sometimes they think that maybe they don't need treatment or they don't need to see a therapist because it only happens during the season. And sometimes you need to think about therapy or counseling kind of like as a tune-up for adults, right? Like
Absolutely.
So it's something you could just go in and check in and see you're okay, and then you can stop whenever you feel good or better. But I think it's always important to have that, as a kind of like a backup plan if your plan, like you said, goes wrong or doesn't work the way you want it to work.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add?
Let's
You don't
see.
have to. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add for that because I don't go through it.
Yeah.
But, I do know people that do. But, yeah, basically what you guys were saying, it's just like those certain tips my dad always tells me, exercise, talking to people, making sure you don't cut yourself off from people.
Right,
That's
right.
very important because I know,
Absolutely.
yeah, it will happen. And it's just like if you cut yourself off, then there's no support coming from anybody.
Right.
So, yeah, that's my biggest thing.
Yeah, and that's another thing I'll say. I'm glad you said that because it reminded me of something related to more so, the parents and the therapy. And I also want to remind students and parents, because this is a resource available to anybody, if someone finds themselves in a mental health crisis, to make sure they reach out to that 988 line. They'll have access to a trained crisis responder that will help talk through some of the things. So a mental health crisis might be, thinking about suicide, having suicidal ideation or self-harm, or any of those mental health crises, thinking about, doing drugs or any of those things that could be very harmful, to encourage them to dial that 988 number and just consistently reach out to that support as it's needed in the crisis time. And that's confidential for students and adults as well. It's just an additional resource. It's not, consistent therapy, but I just want to make sure I wanted to touch on it. So in case anybody needs that for a crisis time support. Okay, and next I want to introduce two junior students here at Eleanor Roosevelt High School. We have Alessia and Daisy, the president and vice president of the Bring Change to Mind Club. So the Bring Change to Mind organization has a mission to end the stigma and discrimination surrounding mental illness through youth conversation and awareness campaigns. So thank you both so much for being here to talk a little bit about your club. I was wondering, I guess, first of all, if you could share some information about what exactly is the club, what kind of efforts you make related to mental health, things like that.
So our club is mainly to bring awareness to other people, like students and staff, about like what mental health really is, and to provide like ways in order to cope with like stress, anxiety, depression, and all of that.
Yeah, we really try to approach things as friendly as possible so that we can gain as many members as we can. And basically.
Yeah, that's great. And I hear your sponsor is one of your professional school counselors here at Roosevelt as well. Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's so important, and especially to have, really our students be the ones that are telling us what what you guys are going through and what kind of support you need is very powerful.
Definitely.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about some of the awareness campaigns that you guys have done here so far.
Yeah, so we haven't done much because I started being president of the club for my freshman year, and like COVID hit, and last year we
Right.
lost our sponsor, so it was like a bit of like messy. So this year we're really starting on like spreading awareness.
Yeah,
by-
so I would say last year the most we did was with that table that we did. We
Yeah.
hosted a table for mental health
During the
awareness
spring.
month.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the spring.
Okay.
And it was a bunch of things, and we held it outside of the cafeteria so we could gain like publicity almost among students.
Yeah.
And it was like a fidget toy like type of thing, and then
Stickers.
stickers.
Oh, so like different giveaways for
Right.
people.
Yeah, there was a
Okay.
raffle for like a mental health bucket, like things like that. And then now that we're actually getting started this year, I think we're looking forward into hosting actual events like that. And then right now, since we just started, we're like kind of halfway
Yeah.
starting the club. We're doing things in our own meetings that are like spreading awareness, and like really just having meetings that are kind of like friendly, like yeah.
and more
Yeah.
positive. Yeah.
So conversations amongst your own club about,
Right.
checking in about where everyone's mental health is and having that safe space for
Yes.
students. I'm hearing that's amazing. I was also wondering if you could tell us, so I understand that, Bring Change to Mind is a national organization,
It is.
right? So anybody can hypothetically start a club
Yeah.
at their school if they wanted. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about if a student might be listening and thinking, oh, I would love something like that at my school. How might they go about, establishing a Bring Change to Mind club at their own school?
Yeah, so if they're interested in like bring change to mind, I would recommend them to talk to like a trusted adult or like anyone that they feel like like comfortable around with to like in order to start Bring Change to Mind Club, and then just like start like telling them fun facts about the organization, because like you said, it's a nationwide organization, and it would just help students feel more comfortable talking about their mental health, because not that many students have like those sort of like resources. And yeah.
Yeah, so I would say speak with the guidance counselor to, first get in contact with the organization, and then once you have that contact, you can speak about getting a sponsor at your school with the said trusted adult, like
Yeah.
you said.
So first establishing people that will be interested at the school,
Exactly.
both, students and a sponsor, and then reaching out to the organization. So
Yes.
have they helped you guys in establishing the club? Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the guidance that you get from the organization about efforts from the club?
Definitely. They have helped us a lot, actually, because they have given us like a grant for the club.
Yeah,
in
the
order to start.
organization.
And they also like provide like Headspace for all the club members. So Headspace is an app like that's really useful to meditate, to relax if you feel stressed with anything.
And I would say like the people at our school anyways, like the school psychologists and our guidance counselors, they're the main ones that help us the most. Since Bring Change to Mind is a student-led like organization, we're the ones that are like organizing the club meetings, but they're really like helping us behind the scenes.
Yeah, they are.
Right. Okay. Making sure you have all
Right.
the information that you need and the support.
And the things for like tables and events.
Got it. That's great. That's great that you guys have been able to establish that partnership here at Eleanor Roosevelt High School, and hopefully, people are listening to it. And I know there's a lot of different kinds of clubs around mental health and things like body image and mindfulness.
Yeah.
But if somebody is interested, I'm sure that your information that you've shared has been really helpful. So
Yeah.
thank you so much
Of
for
course.
being on. And is there anything else you'd like to share about the club, or anything else that people should know?
Just that, if you are interested in starting a mental health club, even if it's not Bring Change to Mind, definitely talk about it with your friends first.
Yeah.
Get people like hyped up and like thinking about what you want to do, and then reach out to your
Yeah.
a trusted teacher that you like.
And mental health is something like a very serious topic, and I feel like people need like coping skills.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And especially like students like juniors or even like freshmen, like they are like stressed and overwhelmed with like all the like assignments.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So-
And I feel like each grade level has its own unique
Yes.
Level of
stressors.
stress,
And then
actually.
there's those things that everybody kind of
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah, so
everybody's got mental health. So
Exactly.
sounds like
club-
everybody can benefit from a club like
course.
yours.
the
Yeah.
club just just let you unwind and gain like friends.
Yeah, and be comfortable around each other. That's like the main goal for our club.
Yeah. Well, I'm so happy that you guys have really established that
Yeah.
and that you've been able to provide that to other students. That's really powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so
All
much.
right.
That's it for our
Yes,
Wellness
of
Wednesday.
course.
And thank you to Naya and Miss Hernandez and you all for
Yes.
tuning in. If you have any questions that you'd like answered on the podcast, that's also linked in the survey in the caption. You'll also find links for the Bring Change to Mind organization, Hazel Health, and the 988 resource. So thank you again.
All right. Thank you for
Have
having
a
me.
great evening. Bye.
Yes.